Welcome address from Mike Russell, MSP. He's the MSP for Argyll and Bute and the Cabinet Secretary for Government Business and Constitutional Relations. Conference, please welcome Mike Russell, MSP.
Kirsten, thank you, and first of all, good luck with your first conference in the chair. Convener, fellow delegates, I should say it too, welcome to Edinburgh. It's great to be standing here in our capital city this morning and standing behind this one big, in every sense of the word, hope. We're in a week when my colleagues and I have been portrayed as superheroes. I'm sorry I'm not wearing my Thor costume today. I'll let you into a wee bit of a secret, it was a bit tight. But you won't be surprised then that I start this welcome address with a bit of mythology. In Greek myth, after Pandora had opened her box and released all the ills of the world amongst humanity, she closed the lid to ensure that one thing, and only one thing, remained, and that was hope. Hope, according to the proverb, springs eternal. Nothing can be done, said Helen Keller, without hope and confidence. And hope for a better future for Scotland, underpinned by the hard work that we need to put in to achieve it, has been what has taken this party, our movement, from the fringes of Scottish politics to its very heart. Convener, fellow delegates, 45 years ago, I joined the SNP in this city. I did so as an affirmation of my hope for a better Scotland. Now, that time wasn't unlike our own, but the challenges we faced then were not nearly as grave as the ones we face now. At that time, of course, Westminster ignored us, then as now. In fact, at that time, we didn't even have our own parliament. Amazingly, it was still a quarter of a century away. At that time, there was a stalemate in UK politics and deep divisions about resolving a crisis, then as now. And there was an existential threat to our economy, our society, and our well-being, then as now. 1974 was a year when all those things plagued our nation, and the response of our nation in both the February and the October elections of that year was to turn to the SNP. The effect of that, 7 and then 11 seats won first past the post, 22% and then 30% share of the vote, 41 second places in October, was to galvanise the UK into action in order to try and head off our party, to head off our nation and our attempt to give our country back to its own people. And 5 years later, after endless delaying and a cheated referendum, they wore the people of Scotland down. And they thought that it was back to business as usual. But it wasn't. For the next 18 years, Scotland suffered industrial decimation. We lost to emigration and sometimes to worse, a whole generation. But we didn't give up. We kept our hope alive. This party was polling in single figures and recording the same in elections and by-elections. Many of you remember that. Now we hold those constituencies with majorities in the thousands. But we didn't give up. We continued to hope and to work for a better future. By working with others, we helped to regain a parliament. By working in that parliament, we became a government, and we've been that for the last 12 years. And even so, fellow delegates, 2 polls in the last few days have shown that we are still by far and away the most popular party in Scotland, ready to win back seats in a Westminster general election and working for victory in next month's European election. And that is because our fellow citizens, the people we live amongst and work amongst, recognise that we have achieved much for Scotland. Too much to list, even in all the steps that are outside there. But here's just a few of the high points. Over 20,000 baby boxes have welcomed new Scots into our country. We've delivered and embedded the right to free education and massively expanded education and childcare in the crucial early years. Health spending is at a record level. We have the best performing health service in these islands. Recorded crime is at a record low, as is unemployment. Employment is at a record high. We have encouraged and supported a massive growth in our food industries. We put in place leading climate change legislation. We've built a record number of new schools, invested in hospitals, improved infrastructure, and all in the face of savage Westminster spending cuts. And we secured a referendum on independence, which, alas, we didn't win. But we don't give up. And we're now faced with a dislocation the like of which we have never seen before. Brexit, if it happens, will deliver a devastating blow. It will destroy thousands of jobs. It will, by driving away talented and welcome EU citizens, undermine whole industries and increase depopulation in our rural areas. And trying to deliver that poisoned policy is the most intransigent, the most arrogant UK government ever. It has shown contempt for Scotland and the views of the people of Scotland. It has ignored those who voted not to leave the EU. But incredibly, it's even alienated those who did vote to leave the EU. And that government has also set its face against allowing the people to choose their own future. Of course, we know why. This morning's opinion poll illustrates the reason perfectly. Our campaign is far from won, but today we see that independence support is at 49%. We're not there yet, but no wonder they're running scared, because we don't give up. And because we've led from the front with reasoned arguments and confidence in them, because we have had and continue to have hope, people are once again turning in their numbers to the SNP in this time of crisis and confusion. And we have tried to help in many ways. For example, we've not only defended Scottish interests and supported Scottish businesses in the Brexit process, we've also invested almost £150,000 in the last year, making sure that people, ordinary people, young people, could have their voices heard and their concerns explored by the Scottish Government. And in the coming European elections, and I'm looking forward to them, in the coming European elections, we're giving all our fellow citizens who oppose Brexit the opportunity to send the Scottish message to London and to Brussels. All these things mean that many people are more than thankful that there now is a Scottish Parliament and a Scottish party there to speak for them. And Scotland is becoming a better country to live in because the people of Scotland have a parliament, despite tooth and nail opposition from the Tories over many years, which we shouldn't forget. And they've chosen the SNP as their government to work tirelessly for the people every day of the day job in the parliament. But we're doing more too. Convener, I have no doubt that legally, constitutionally, by dint of campaigning and argument, by persistence and progressive politics, and with the absolute right to full international recognition and full membership of international partnerships like the EU, Scotland is moving inexorably to independence. And we will get there as long as we take the right path in the right way. A path and a way set out by the First Minister on Wednesday. Convener, it's not hard to find negative reasons based on absolute dismay at appalling Westminster behaviour, which would drive any sensible, rational person into supporting a Scotland with a clear, direct and independent voice in the EU and in the world. Brexit's not the only reason for change in our constitutional status, but it is a massive object lesson in the continuing failure of an archaic, deeply divided and out-of-touch Westminster system, which looks, sounds, and is well past its sell-by date. But new countries or countries reborn on the international stage need positive foundations and roots that are nourished by good things rather than by bad. And we need to talk about those good reasons all the time. The journey for any nation to independence is never easy or straightforward. But because we live in an age that expects instant feedback and instant action, we sometimes think that minds can be changed and countries transformed merely by a tweet or a hashtag. I wish it was so. I also wish we didn't live in a system of governance devolution which dances round the outmoded, almost medieval idea of a sovereign parliament at Westminster. We want to have done with that. But we must also be prepared to mitigate it whilst we still endure it, and be alive to ways it can be changed for the immediate relief of some of the problems experienced by all who live in these islands, though any change of any type is always resisted by a Tory UK government. And that's why we should always be willing to talk to others about their ideas. No one political group or section of society has a monopoly on wisdom, not even us. All of us, to a greater or lesser extent, accept that change is needed. So we should all be open to listening as well as talking. And that's what I pledge myself to do with the other parties in the coming weeks and months. Without compromising principles or beliefs on any side and about anything. Of course, we think that nothing will in the end serve any nation, anywhere, as well as equality. And there is a constitutional escape route to equality, which this party had the wisdom to ensure was built in to what was agreed 20 years ago when devolution was finally enacted. There is a political way to overcome the constitutional blockage, and it's been used politically before. We saw how it worked in 2012 when the Edinburgh Agreement opened the door to the 2014 referendum. The people instructed a Scottish government to seek such an order, and their voice prevailed despite initial refusals by the Westminster government. And earlier we saw how the idea behind it, the idea of democracy, of Scottish popular sovereignty, worked even before our Parliament was restored, because it was a political movement that in the end overturned another refusal of the Tories to respond to the democratic wishes of Scotland. It was Canon Kenyon Wright who expressed it best. Referring in 1989 to a likely Thatcherite veto of Scottish aspirations, he asked what would happen when, as he put it, the voice we know so well says, "We are no, and we are the state." Well, he responded rhetorically, "We say yes, and we are the people." The people say yes. That's the strongest argument, and it's up to us to make sure it's heard, again and again and afresh. But times are also different now. After the unifying experience of the independent referendum in 2014, in the 2016 and 17 elections, the Tories decided to polarise opinion for their own selfish ends. Now public opinion is turning on them. But the legacy of polarisation is poisonous, and the further polarising effect of Brexit, added to that brew, has changed our politics utterly. So as we prepare to enter into a new state, we must shed the bitterness and division of the old state. 167 years ago, Abraham Lincoln pointed that out in a message to Congress. In a time of huge suffering that changed his nation in the most extreme way, he still pointed forward. The dogmas of the quiet past, he said, are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. And he went on, as our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We too have to rise to the occasion. We have to recognize that the past dogmas don't meet the present challenge. We must therefore think anew and act anew in order to create something new, a new Scotland. And we must do it in the way that Lincoln called plain, peaceful, generous, just, a way which he said, if followed, the world will forever applaud. So we must do it together, not just within parties that already want it to happen, but with all our fellow citizens. We need to encourage everyone who lives here to play a part in building our new national story. We need to encourage those people not by ignoring them or by insulting them or by challenging them in ways to which they can't respond. We need to make sure that we will do it by working with them and listening to them, because in so doing, we will all become stronger. The Citizens' Assembly announced by the First Minister on Wednesday is a radical new initiative. It will allow Scotland to engage with its future in a constructive and thoughtful way. Much of what we as a nation have experienced during the Brexit process has been at odds with the values of our society in Scotland. We must now find ways to ensure that those values, our principles, are enshrined in our governance. And our fellow citizens can help us to do so. And the time is right to think anew and act anew as we approach the 20th anniversary of the Scottish Parliament. That Parliament, long fought for, was itself a result of an exercise to determine options for Scotland's future. The Constitutional Convention was largely a vehicle for those already engaged in civic life and politics in Scotland, but the tradition is important. A genuinely inclusive and open-minded Citizens' Assembly would update the tradition for the 21st century. It would teach us a lot and help our country to come together with a shared vision. Convener, earlier I talked about this time being one in which instant change and progress was expected. But this is also an age in which extremes flourish. And to counter those extremes that they dislike, many think that they also have to respond to be extreme, to talk even to those with whom they should be making common cause. Our common cause here is independence. Our common aim is to achieve it. There is a democratic pathway towards it, which ensures that when we get there, our effort will be internationally accepted. And there are ways, and this is crucial, that we can unify Scotland around that vision. The pathway is broad. We need to walk it with all our fellow citizens. Convener, this is the first time that our parties met in conference in Edinburgh for a long time. It's a great pleasure for me to deliver this welcome address because it lets me celebrate this great city. I'm lucky in having lived my life in both the west and the east of the Scotland, which, as we all know, is the real fundamental divide in Scotland. I was brought up in Ayrshire, live in Argyll. I got there via the Western Isles, but also via Edinburgh, where my mother went to school, where my grandparents lived for most of their lives, where I went to university, had my first job, where I've kept coming back, eventually as a member of the first Parliament to sit in the city in 292 years. That great international Scot, Ricky DeMarco, exhibiting this year at the Venice Biennale at the age of 87, got it right about this place when he observed that Edinburgh belongs to the world. Edinburgh, its architecture, its cultural richness, its landscape, does belong to the world, as Scotland belongs in the world. And we must redouble our efforts to join that world as an equal nation once again. Edinburgh was also the home of that great veteran nationalist Paul Scott, who gave so much to his country and to his party, and whom we lost only a few weeks ago. Of his many works, I particularly value his 1992 book on Andrew Fletcher and the Treaty of Union. Scott points out that the central to Fletcher's political philosophy was the idea of the autonomy of a small state such as Scotland being best exercised by cooperation across Europe. And he concludes the book with this observation: Scotland and Europe may now, at last, be on the brink of achieving a settlement with a recognisable affinity to Fletcher's proposals for a right regulation of governments for the common good of mankind. That was written almost 30 years ago. It was very prescient. And how much closer we are to it today, thanks, of course, to lifelong, determined, passionate, hard-working nationalists like Paul Scott. And we will be closer yet if we take the opportunity afforded by the European elections, by the preparations announced by the First Minister on Wednesday, and by the enthusiasm and commitment of this national movement, to ensure that at all times, in every way, we drive forward along that constitutional pathway that leads us to achieving Scottish autonomy and exercising it by means of cooperation across Europe. Convener, fellow delegates, I'm as hungry for that as I was 45 years ago in this city when I joined this party, starting out on a political and lifetime journey that has led me here. There's still a distance for us still to go, but we have come a vast distance already, further, if not faster, than was expected in that bleak time. But we have to finish the journey. So let's do it in a way that secures forever long-lasting, united, inclusive, progressive success. The success of living, working and loving in an independent Scotland. Independence, which we've all worked for. Independence, which is now within our grasp. Independence, moving on from hope to reality.